I'm Harper, 33, and I run what my family mockingly calls that little antique shop in Boston. For years, they've dismissed my passion while praising my sister Madison's law career. What they didn't know was that behind my modest lifestyle lies a $15 million fortune I've quietly built. I arrived at Thanksgiving with my usual trepidation and simple gifts, never expecting everything to implode. When Madison borrowed my phone and saw a banking notification, her shocked expression told me my secret was out. As my family gathered around the turkey, I watched my carefully constructed world crumble. If you've ever had family judge your success before knowing the whole story, drop a like and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from. I could use some allies as I tell you how my Thanksgiving turned into a battlefield over money nobody knew I had. Growing up in suburban Massachusetts, I learned early that appearances mattered more than authenticity in the Barrett household. My parents, Thomas and Elaine, had specific ideas about success: prestigious degrees, conventional careers, and the kind of achievements you could brag about at neighborhood barbecues. My father worked as a bank manager, my mother as a high school administrator. We lived comfortably in a colonial-style house with a manicured lawn and hosted dinner parties where everyone wore pressed clothes and perfect smiles. Then there was Madison, my older sister by 3 years. From the moment she brought home her first straight A report card, she became the golden standard against which I was measured. Madison checked every box on my parents' success checklist: valedictorian, Ivy League law degree, marriage to Logan, a dermatologist with his own practice, and 2 children with impeccable manners and private school educations. Their family Christmas cards looked like Ralph Lauren advertisements. Your sister made partner at 32. My mother would remind me during our monthly calls. The youngest female partner in the firm's history. This fact was repeated so often it might as well have been embroidered on our family crest. My interests diverged early. While Madison joined debate club and student government, I spent hours in our town's small historical society, fascinated by artifacts from colonial New England. I traced my fingers over glass cases containing Revolutionary War-era buttons and handwritten letters, imagining the stories behind each item. The elderly curator, Mrs. Jameson, noticed my fascination and began teaching me about preservation, provenance, and the hidden language of antiques. "You have the eye," she told me once. "Some people can look at an old chair and just see what you see. The hands that crafted it, the people who sat in it, the history it witnessed." When I announced my intention to study art history in college, my father's disappointment was palpable. "What exactly do you plan to do with that degree?" he asked, not looking up from his newspaper. "Museums pay nothing, you know." "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But it's what I love." "Love doesn't pay the mortgage," he replied, effectively ending the conversation. I chose a state university with a solid art history program, a decision that prompted frequent comparisons to Madison's Ivy League pedigree. During family dinners, my parents would steer conversations toward Madison's law school accomplishments, while my summer internship at the Museum of Fine Arts was mentioned only in passing, if at all. After graduation, I worked at an auction house for 3 years, absorbing everything I could about valuation, authentication, and the art market. My supervisors noted my unusual ability to spot overlooked treasures, but my salary remained modest. When I announced my plan to open an antique shop at 25, my family's reaction was predictably dismissive. "Playing store," my mother called it, as if I were a child setting up a lemonade stand. "It's a tough business," my father warned. "Most small retailers fail within the first year." Madison was more blunt. "You're wasting your education on a hobby. No one gets rich selling other people's junk." I found a small storefront in Boston's historic North End, in a narrow brick building with uneven floors and exposed beams. The rent stretched my savings thin, but something about the space felt right. I named it Timeless Treasures and spent weeks refinishing the interior, installing antique display cases I'd rescued from a closing department store, and cataloging my initial inventory. The shop opened with little fanfare. My parents attended the opening, but spent most of the evening talking to Madison and Logan about their recent vacation to Bermuda. I overheard my mother apologizing to a family friend. "It's just a phase." She'll find her real career eventually. For 8 years, this perception persisted. At every family gathering, my profession was treated as a temporary diversion, something to be tolerated until I found a real job. The questions became predictable. Is that little shop still keeping the lights on? My father, have you thought about getting your teaching certificate as a backup? My mother, don't you get bored sitting there all day waiting for customers? Madison, what they didn't understand, what I never explained, was that I had found my calling. Each piece that passed through my shop had a story, a lineage, a soul. I could look at a tarnished silver teapot and recognize its Georgian craftsmanship, or identify a Massachusetts-made Chip-and-Dale chair from subtle details in its carvings. This knowledge wasn't just academic. It had practical value that my family couldn't see. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter followed the same script. Madison would hold court in the living room, detailing her latest legal triumph or her children's achievements. I would help in the kitchen, assigned to peeling potatoes or setting the table, occasionally asked perfunctory questions about the shop, but never given space to truly answer. "We worry about your retirement," my mother would say, stirring cranberry sauce. "Madison's firm has an excellent 401k match." These gatherings left me emotionally drained, driving back to Boston with a hollow feeling in my chest. In my apartment above the shop, surrounded by the treasures I'd kept for my personal collection, I'd allow myself to acknowledge the hurt. But by morning, I'd push it aside and return to work, to the world where my knowledge was respected and my passion understood. What my family never knew was that beneath their dismissal, I was building something extraordinary, something that would eventually shatter their perception of me in a single Thanksgiving moment. The first time I realized I could turn my knowledge into serious money happened almost by accident. 3 years after opening my shop, I was browsing a weekend estate sale in Brooklyn, fighting rain and early morning chill. The house belonged to a recently deceased professor, and most of the valuable items had already been claimed by family members. What remained was being liquidated by a company that specialized in quick turnover rather than careful assessment. In the basement, leaning against a water heater, I spotted a small darkened oil painting in a tarnished frame. The liquidator had marked it at $50, assuming it was a worthless reproduction. But something about the brushwork caught my eye. The confident strokes, the luminous quality of light. I bought it without haggling, along with some vintage books to avoid drawing attention to my interest in the painting. After careful cleaning and research, I confirmed my suspicion. It was an early work by a significant 19th century American landscape artist, worth approximately $120,000. I sold it through a small auction house in New York for $145,000 minus their commission. This was my first significant windfall, but not my last. I developed a system, visiting estate sales in wealthy New England towns, developing relationships with house clearance specialists, and occasionally traveling to rural auctions where sophisticated buyers were scarce. I learned to look for items with specific characteristics that suggested hidden value, quality that transcended fashion, historical significance overlooked by generalist appraisers, or works by artists on the cusp of rediscovery. One rainy Tuesday, an elderly man brought in a cardboard box of old papers he'd found while clearing his aunt's attic. Among musty recipes and faded letters was a folded document with a barely legible signature. I recognized it immediately as a Revolutionary War-era letter written by a significant historical figure. I paid him $75 for the entire box. 6 months later, after authentication and careful restoration, that document sold to a private collector for $600,000. These weren't everyday occurrences, but they happened often enough. A Tiffany lamp purchased for $200 at a church rummage sale sold for $25,000. A collection of early photography I acquired for $350 was worth over $40,000 to the right museum. A seemingly ordinary desk from a university surplus sale contained a hidden compartment with Civil War-era gold coins. I became strategic about my success. In the small world of New England antique dealers, I maintained a reputation as a knowledgeable but modest shop owner. I sold my most valuable discoveries through larger auction houses in New York or through private dealers, keeping my name off the provenance. The money went into investment accounts managed by a discreet financial advisor who specialized in helping entrepreneurs maintain low profiles. My lifestyle remained unchanged. I drove the same reliable Toyota I'd had since college. My wardrobe consisted primarily of quality basics: Goodwill sweaters, well-made jeans, and comfortable boots. I took simple pleasures in good coffee, interesting books, and occasional dinners at neighborhood restaurants where I knew the owners. My most significant indulgence was traveling to Europe once a year, ostensibly for buying trips, but really to visit museums and historical sites that fed my passion for history. The only substantial change in my circumstances came 5 years ago, when the owner of my building decided to sell. Fearing displacement, I used some of my capital to purchase not just my storefront, but the entire historic building through an LLC that couldn't be easily traced back to me. The 4-story brick structure gave me security and eventually additional income from the other commercial and residential units. By the time of last year's Thanksgiving, my net worth had quietly grown to just over $15 million. The bulk was in diversified investments, with smaller portions in real estate, rare books, and a carefully curated personal collection of antiques too special to sell. My financial advisor had recently congratulated me on reaching this milestone with a text message, the same message that would ultimately expose my secret. I had specific reasons for keeping my wealth private. Initially, it was simple business sense. In the antiquing world, showing too much prosperity can make sellers raise their prices or attract competitors to your sources. But as time passed, my silence became more personal. Each dismissive comment from my family had built a wall between us. Each time they minimized my career as cute or quaint, I added another brick. Their perception of me as the underachieving daughter had calcified, and in some perverse way, I'd grown attached to it. As the unsuccessful sister, at least I was free from expectations. No one asked me for financial advice or loans. No one expected me to fund family vacations or children's college funds. More importantly, the few relationships I maintained outside my family were genuine. My small circle of friends, other shop owners in the North End, a couple of museum curators, my upstairs tenant who taught art at a community college, liked me for myself, not my bank account. In a world where I'd learned to spot fakes and forgeries, these authentic connections were priceless. I'd occasionally considered revealing the truth, especially after particularly condescending family gatherings. But something always held me back. Fear that money would transform me from disappointing daughter to family bank, that any subsequent warmth would be tainted by financial interest. So I maintained my modest facade, showing up to family events with simple gifts and quiet stories about interesting items that had passed through my shop. I listened to Madison's monologues about her firm's high-profile cases and her children's private school achievements. I helped my mother in the kitchen and discussed baseball with my father. I played my assigned role in the family drama until last Thanksgiving, when everything changed. I woke before dawn on Thanksgiving Day, anxiety already turning in my stomach. The weather matched my mood, gray and threatening, with a sharp wind that scattered the last brittle leaves across the cobblestones of the North End. I'd baked cranberry bread the night before and carefully wrapped 3 vintage books I'd found for my niece and nephew, knowing they'd probably prefer electronic gifts, but hoping to share a bit of my world with them. The drive to my parents' suburban home took longer than usual due to holiday traffic. Madison's gleaming SUV already occupied the prime spot in the driveway when I arrived, forcing me to park on the street. Through the bay window, I could see my mother laughing at something Madison was saying, her hand resting affectionately on my sister's shoulder. I sat in my car for an extra moment, rehearsing the mental script I'd developed over years of family gatherings. Smile politely, deflect personal questions, show interest in others, and escape as soon as socially acceptable. With the cranberry bread and gifts balanced precariously in my arms, I made my way to the front door. "There she is," my mother exclaimed as I entered, her voice carrying the slightly too enthusiastic tone she used when she was trying to be encouraging. "Madison just got here too. Perfect timing." My sister looked up from her phone, her smile professional and practiced. At 36, Madison maintained the polished appearance of a woman featured in business magazines. Sleek bob, subtle makeup, and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly utility bills. The shop girl arrives, she said, using the nickname she knew I disliked. How's retail treating you during the holiday rush? Getting lots of customers looking for dusty treasures? It's steady, I replied, the standard answer that neither invited further questions nor gave any real information. How are the kids? This predictably launched Madison into a detailed account of Sophia's violin recital and Max's soccer championship. I nodded at appropriate intervals while helping my mother in the kitchen, where she immediately assigned me to vegetable prep while she worked on more complex dishes. My father entered, already holding his traditional pre-dinner scotch. There's my girls, he said, kissing Madison on the cheek before giving me an awkward side hug. How's business, Harper? Still keeping afloat? I'm doing fine, Dad, I said, focusing on perfectly dicing celery for the stuffing. That's good. That's good, he replied absently. Did Madison tell you about the Anderson case? Made the front page of the Boston Globe business section. And so it went. The familiar choreography of our family dynamic. Madison's husband, Logan, arrived with the children who politely thanked me for the books before setting them aside in favor of their tablets. My brother-in-law immediately launched into a story about a celebrity client at his dermatology practice, careful to mention the caliber of the restaurants where they'd subsequently had lunch. Around 3 o'clock, as food preparation reached its critical stage, Madison's constant phone notifications became a source of irritation for my mother. Madison, please put that thing away or silence it, she said, exasperated after a particularly loud ping interrupted her gravy instructions. Sorry, Mom, but I'm waiting for an important email about the Peterson merger, Madison replied. Battery's almost dead anyway. Hey, Mac, can I borrow your phone? Mine's about to die and I need to check my email. Before I could object, she'd spotted my phone on the counter, where I'd placed it while washing cranberries. Madison picked it up and I thought nothing of it, until I remembered the text notification that had arrived that morning from my financial advisor, still unread on my lock screen. Time seemed to slow as I watched Madison's expression transform from casual interest to confusion, then widening shock as she read, Congratulations on surpassing the $15 million mark this quarter. Your diversification strategy is paying off nicely. Let's discuss next steps for the property acquisition when you're back from the holiday. What the hell is this? Madison's voice cut through the kitchen noise. She turned the phone toward me, her hand shaking slightly. $15 million? Is this some kind of joke? My mother stopped stirring the gravy. My father lowered his scotch glass. The kitchen fell silent except for the timer on the oven, its cheerful beeping suddenly absurd in the tension. Madison, give me my phone, I said quietly, reaching for it. She pulled it back. Number, I want to know what this means. Are you in some kind of trouble? Money laundering? Because if you're involved in something illegal, I need to know before it affects my reputation at the firm. The immediate assumption that any wealth I possessed must be illegitimate stung more than I expected. It's not illegal, I said, feeling a strange calm descend. It's mine. I earned it. Now please give me back my phone. My father stepped forward. What's going on, Harper? What is Madison talking about? Madison thrust the phone toward him. Apparently, your struggling shop girl is sitting on $15 million she never bothered to mention to any of us. My father's eyes widened as he read the message, then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. A disconcerting mixture of shock, confusion, and something that looked unsettlingly like calculation. Is this true? He asked. The moment I'd unconsciously feared for years had arrived. My carefully constructed separation between family and finances had collapsed in an instant. I took a deep breath. Yes, it's true. I've been successful in my business. More successful than I've let on. Successful? Madison laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. That's like calling the ocean a bit wet. $15 million while you've been showing up here in thrift store clothes, letting us think you were barely scraping by? That's not success. That's deception. I never said I was struggling, I countered, feeling defensive. You all assumed that. My mother, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "Dinner's ready. Everyone to the table. We can discuss this while we eat." It was such a typically maternal response, no matter the crisis, meals must proceed on schedule, that I almost laughed. But the gravity in her voice suggested this wasn't an attempt to change the subject, merely to relocate the confrontation. We moved to the dining room in silence. The elaborate Thanksgiving spread suddenly felt insignificant. As we took our seats, I noticed Logan whispering to Madison, his expression intense. The children, sensing the tension, became unusually quiet, eyes darting between the adults. My father cleared his throat after a painfully silent prayer. "I think we deserve an explanation, Harper." And so, as the turkey grew cold and the gravy congealed, I gave them the abbreviated version. My eye for undervalued items, the significant finds, the strategic investments. I explained how I'd built my fortune piece by piece, find by find, investment by investment. Instead of the grudging respect I might have hoped for, each revelation seemed to fuel their indignation. Madison's face flushed deeper red with every detail. My parents exchanged glances loaded with unspoken communication. Logan kept taking out his phone, typing figures into a calculator app. "So all these years," Madison finally interrupted, "while we've been worried about you, feeling sorry for you with your little shop, you've been secretly a millionaire? Laughing at us behind our backs?" "I wasn't laughing at anyone," I said. "I just kept my business to myself." "Family doesn't keep secrets like this," my mother said, her voice trembling. "Family shares their blessings, like you've shared in my interests all these years." The words escaped before I could stop them. "Every time I tried to talk about my work, you changed the subject to Madison's latest achievement." "That's not fair," my father interjected. "We were concerned about your future. If we'd known you were doing well, you would have—" "What?" I asked. "Suddenly been interested in antiques? Stopped calling it playing store?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My nephew asked if he could be excused to watch television, and Madison nodded absently, her eyes never leaving my face. "I think," she said finally, her lawyer voice emerging, "that we need to have a serious family discussion about this, in the living room." Now, as we abandoned the Thanksgiving feast my mother had spent days preparing, I knew we were heading into a conversation that would permanently alter our family dynamic. What I didn't yet realize was just how nakedly it would reveal what my family really thought of me, and what they believed they were entitled to. The transition from dining room to living room felt like walking from one courtroom to another. Madison led the procession, her back rigid with indignation. My parents followed, exchanging whispers I couldn't quite catch. Logan instructed the children to stay upstairs with their tablets. "Adult conversation," he explained with artificial cheerfulness. I trailed behind, a defendant approaching the bench. Our family living room had remained largely unchanged since my childhood. The same overstuffed sofa and matching armchairs arranged around a coffee table perpetually stacked with home design magazines no one ever read. The only updates were the progressively larger school photos of Madison's children on the mantel, chronicling their growth from toddlers to preteen in matching outfits and practiced smiles. Madison took the central position on the sofa, my parents flanking her like supporting counsel. Logan chose the armchair nearest my sister, leaving me the seat furthest from the group. The physical arrangement wasn't subtle. 4 against 1. "I think we need complete transparency now," Madison began, her professional tone barely masking her emotion. "Exactly how much money are we talking about? And in what forms?" The presumptuous "we" wasn't lost on me. "I don't see how the specifics are relevant," I replied. "It's my personal financial information." "It became relevant the moment we discovered you've been hiding millions while watching the rest of us struggle," Madison shot back. "Struggle?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Madison, you make over $300,000 a year. Logan's practice brings in more than that. You vacation in the Maldives and drive a car that costs more than some houses. We have expenses you can't imagine," Logan interjected. Private school tuition for 2 children is over $60,000 annually. The country club membership is another $40,000. The vacation property in Vermont. Madison's student loans are still over $100,000 despite a decade of payments. Those are choices, not struggles, I pointed out. My mother leaned forward, her expression pained. Harper, please. This hostile attitude isn't helping. We're just trying to understand why you kept such a significant secret from people who love you. Her words might have moved me if my father hadn't immediately followed with, 15 million? Good God. And here we've been concerned about your retirement planning. All those conversations about whether you should get a real job with benefits. My job is real, I said firmly. It's always been real. The fact that you never respected it doesn't change that. That's unfair, my mother protested weakly. We just worried. Madison had been uncharacteristically quiet for a moment, seemingly lost in calculation. When she spoke again, her voice had transformed to the trembling, emotional tone I recognized from her courtroom performances. Do you have any idea what that kind of money would mean for Sophia and Max? Tears welled in her eyes. Sophia's showing real promise with violin. She could study abroad, attend Juilliard, and Max might need special tutoring for his dyslexia. The good programs cost a fortune. I blinked, surprised. I didn't know Max had dyslexia. We just got the diagnosis, Madison continued, seizing on my moment of sympathy. The specialists, the programs, insurance barely covers any of it. Meanwhile, you're sitting on a fortune that you, as a single woman with no children, can't possibly need all for yourself. And there it was, the first direct suggestion that my money should be redistributed according to their perception of need. Logan nodded eagerly. Even a small portion, say $5 million, invested properly could secure the children's future and help with Madison's student debt. You'd still have $10 million left, more than enough for one person. The casual way he proposed dividing my life's work, as if cutting a pie at dinner, left me momentarily speechless. My father cleared his throat. Now let's not get ahead of ourselves. But Harper, you have to understand our shock. All these years, your mother and I worried about you. We even set aside a fund to help you if your shop failed. Not much, just $20,000 we could spare. We sacrificed to put you through college, hoping you'd find a stable career. I paid back every cent of my college expenses, I reminded him. 3 years after graduation, I sent checks monthly until it was cleared. That's not the point, my mother interjected. Family supports each other. If one has abundance, they share with those in need. And I'm supposed to believe Madison is in need? I asked incredulously. Madison's eyes narrowed. It's not about being destitute. It's about family obligation. If our positions were reversed, I would help you without hesitation. I doubted this deeply, but kept the thought to myself. The children's education alone. Logan continued as if I hadn't spoken. Harvard undergraduate is projected to cost nearly $500,000 per child by the time they're ready. Then graduate school. The real issue, Madison said, wiping away a strategic tear, is that you've been deceiving us while accumulating wealth that could benefit the entire family. If you really loved us, you would want to share your good fortune. The emotional manipulation was so transparent, I almost admired its boldness. Almost. I earned every dollar through knowledge and work you all dismissed for years, I said quietly. Now suddenly my career is valid because it produced money? Don't be dramatic, Madison, Madison replied. No one is asking for all of it. Just a reasonable portion to help family. That's what normal people do. Normal people don't demand others' money simply because they've discovered it exists, I countered. My father, always the pragmatist, tried a different approach. Think of it as an investment in your niece and nephew. Family legacy. Your money would be going to the next generation, not just disappearing. For the next hour, the conversation circled these themes: family obligation, the children's needs, and increasingly specific suggestions for how my money should be allocated. Madison mentioned a potential investment opportunity through a law firm client. Guaranteed 20% returns, but the buy-in is $2 million minimum. My father suggested I purchase vacation property the whole family could use. Logan wondered aloud if I might provide the down payment for a larger house they'd been considering. With each suggestion, the pretense of family concern grew thinner, revealing the naked entitlement beneath. Not once did anyone ask what I wanted to do with my own money. Not once did anyone acknowledge that perhaps I had earned the right to decide its allocation. The breaking point came when Madison, frustrated by my continued resistance, finally showed her hand completely. "You don't even need it," she snapped. "Look at how you live, that tiny apartment above your shop, those secondhand clothes, that car you've had forever. You live like a pauper anyway. The money is wasted on you." The room fell silent. Even my parents seemed taken aback by the nakedness of the statement. "I think," I said, rising from my chair, "that this conversation is over." "Sit down," Madison demanded. "We're not finished." "Actually, we are." I moved toward the door. "If you walk out now," Madison called after me, "don't expect things to be the same. Family works both ways, Harper. You can't just take and never give back." I turned at the doorway. "What exactly have I taken from you, Madison?" She faltered for a moment before recovering. "Years of concern, worry, emotional support?" "Interesting," I said. I must have missed all that support between the condescension and dismissal. My mother stood, distress evident on her face. "Please, girls, it's Thanksgiving. Let's not say things we'll regret." But it was too late for that. Years of unspoken resentment had broken through the surface, and there would be no returning to polite pretense. "I need you to make a decision right now," Madison said, her voice cold. "Either you help your family the way family should, or you're choosing money over blood. It's that simple." It wasn't simple. Nothing about family ever is. But in that moment, facing four people who had suddenly revealed how they truly saw me, not as a person, but as a resource to be tapped, the path forward clarified with painful brightness. "Goodbye," I said simply. "Happy Thanksgiving." As I walked out into the cold November evening, the sound of Madison's angry protests faded behind me. In my car, hands shaking slightly on the wheel, I realized I was simultaneously devastated and relieved, like someone who has finally put down an impossibly heavy burden they'd been carrying for years. The 20-minute drive back to Boston became a journey through both space and memory. As rain began to spatter against my windshield, each swipe of the wipers seemed to clear away not just water, but years of accumulated pretense. Traffic crawled along the highway, giving me unwanted time to replay the afternoon's events and decades of family dynamics that had led to this moment. I remembered my 8th grade art history presentation. How excited I'd been to share my passion with my family, the careful research I'd done on Vermeer, the handmade visual aids I'd created. My parents had attended only because the event coincided with Madison's debate team finals in the same school. They'd sat through my presentation with polite disinterest, checking their watches repeatedly, then erupted in genuine enthusiasm when Madison won her competition. "That's our girl," my father had cheered, while I stood nearby holding my excellent certificate that no one asked to see. I recalled my college graduation, where my parents had spent most of the celebration dinner discussing Madison's law school acceptance, my accomplishments relegated to brief acknowledgments between more important conversations. The pattern continued through the opening of my shop, my 30th birthday, every holiday and family gathering. A consistent message that my path was less valuable, my achievements less significant, my personhood somehow secondary. By the time I reached Boston, the rain had intensified into a deluge that matched my emotional state. Instead of turning toward my shop in the North End, I found myself driving to Carson Beach in South Boston. The parking lot was deserted. No one else was foolish enough to visit the shore in a November downpour. I sat in my car, watching waves crash against the empty beach, rain drumming on the roof, and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Tears came, not gentle or cleansing, but wrenching sobs that left me gasping. I cried for the family I had wished for all these years, for the conditional love that had been exposed tonight, and for the final shattering of the illusion that things might someday change. An hour passed before the storm, both outside and within me, began to subside. As my breathing steadied, a strange calm descended. I had spent my life seeking approval from people fundamentally incapable of giving it. The realization was both devastating and liberating. I drove to my shop in the North End, climbing the narrow stairs to my apartment above. The space had always been my sanctuary. Walls lined with bookshelves holding my most treasured volumes. Windows overlooking the historic street below. Carefully chosen pieces from my personal collection displayed in thoughtful arrangements. My parents had visited exactly once, 8 years ago, commenting primarily on the lack of square footage and outdated kitchen appliances. That night, I slept fitfully, waking several times to check my phone. There were multiple missed calls and increasingly angry texts from Madison, one confused message from my mother, and silence from my father. I turned the phone off and stared at the ceiling, watching shadows from street lamps create patterns in the darkness. By morning, a decision had crystallized. I showered, dressed in one of my secondhand outfits. Actually, a beautifully tailored vintage Chanel suit that had cost more than Madison's monthly car payment, and prepared to open my shop as usual. Black Friday was typically busy with tourists exploring the North End after Thanksgiving celebrations. Just before unlocking the door, my phone chimed with a final text from Madison. "We need to finish our conversation. Logan and I have an investment opportunity that won't wait. $2 million minimum buy-in. Call immediately." Something inside me snapped. Not in breakdown, but in breakthrough. Previously, I had left significant portions to my niece and nephew in trust. I didn't remove them entirely, but I did revise the terms, adding conditions about education, about the arts, about history. "Are you concerned about legal challenges?" Keller asked gently. "From my sister, the lawyer?" "Always." "There's no legal claim she could make," he reassured me. "Your money is unquestionably yours, earned through legitimate business, but that doesn't always prevent nuisance lawsuits designed to force settlements." I left his office that day with a strange calmness and a renewed appreciation for the protections I had put in place. What once felt like excessive caution now revealed itself as essential foresight. The LLC, the property title shields, the carefully documented transactions. What I had built was not just a business, but a life I had protected brick by brick. And now, with Christmas approaching, the question lingered. What does one do with a holiday when family no longer feels like home? For the first time in my adult life, I wouldn't be attending my parents' traditional Christmas Eve dinner or their Christmas morning brunch. And that realization brought both grief and relief. Grief for the family connection I had once hoped might someday improve, and relief from the performance those gatherings had always required. One snowy evening in mid-December, while sorting through a new collection of vintage holiday postcards, I found myself staring at those idealized images from the early 1900s. Smiling faces around fireplaces, perfectly decorated trees, families locked in harmony. The contrast between those images and my reality hit me with surprising force. I quietly closed the shop early and walked through the gently falling snow to Dr. Camille's office. Dr. Camille had been my therapist for 2 years. What started as sessions to process the isolation of my chosen path eventually evolved into deeper work on family dynamics and self-worth. After recounting everything that had happened on Thanksgiving, she looked at me gently and said, "You've been preparing for this confrontation for years. On some level, you always knew this moment would come." I looked down and admitted, "I thought I'd feel more victorious, like I had finally proven I wasn't the failure they always believed I was. But instead, I just feel sad." "You're grieving," she said plainly. "Not just the family you've stepped away from, but the family you always wished they could be." She then suggested an exercise. Make a list of people in your life who've actually shown you support, validation, and unconditional positive regard, the way families are supposed to. Over the next week, I did exactly that. And what surprised me most was how long that list became. Mrs. Jameson from the Historical Society, who first encouraged my love of antiques. Noah Sterling, who mentored me through college. Taylor, the bakery owner next door, who always saved day-old pastries for me. Keller, my financial advisor, who never judged my choices. Even my regular customers, many of them had shown more interest in my passion and knowledge than my own family ever had. When I shared the list with Dr. Camille, she smiled and said, "This is your family of choice. It's just as real, often healthier than the one we're born into." As Christmas week approached, I made a decision. I wouldn't spend the holiday alone, holding on to bitterness and mourning something that never truly existed. I would build something new. I invited my chosen family to Christmas Eve dinner at my apartment. Nothing fancy, just warm food and honest company. A gathering free from performance and expectation. Then, a few days before Christmas, I received something unexpected. A direct email from my father, the first communication since Thanksgiving. "Harper, your mother and I have been thinking about recent events. While we don't agree with all your choices, we recognize that communication broke down on all sides. Madison remains upset, but your mother misses you terribly. Would you consider meeting for coffee, just the three of us, after the holidays? Dad." That was all the message said. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of their role in what had transpired. But also, for the first time, no demands. No guilt-laden accusations, no manipulation. It was perhaps as close to a gesture of reconciliation as my father was capable of. I didn't reply right away. When I finally did, I kept it simple. I told him I would consider it after the new year. No promises, just space. Space I needed to breathe. On December 23rd, I closed the shop early to prepare for my Christmas Eve gathering. As I walked home through a soft swirl of snowflakes, I passed a small community art center I'd occasionally visited for classes. A sign in the window caught my attention. It advertised their youth scholarship program for underserved children interested in art history and preservation. Without hesitation, I stepped inside and made an anonymous donation of $50,000. The same program had once welcomed me into its summer workshops when I was a child. Back when my parents dismissed art history as a useless interest, not worth funding. That small gesture felt like returning a debt of gratitude, but also reclaiming part of my story. Christmas Eve arrived crisp and clear. The stars hung like ornaments above Boston's historic buildings. My apartment soon filled with the warmth of genuine company. Taylor from the bakery, Noah Sterling and his husband, two fellow shop owners. Keller, my advisor, brought his teenage daughter. Conversation flowed easily. Laughter echoed off the brick walls. There was no judgment, no hierarchy, only shared stories and simple joy. We exchanged modest gifts, ate well, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was performing for anyone. I was simply present. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing quietly by the window, watching the snow begin to fall again, transforming the street below into something soft and almost magical. Noah Sterling joined me, his voice gentle. "Penny for your thoughts?" "I was just thinking about authenticity," I replied. "How rare and valuable it is, like the best antiques. You can't fake it, not really." He nodded thoughtfully. "The irony is what your family covets, the money, came precisely from your authentic self, the part they never valued. There's a metaphor in there somewhere." I smiled. "Indeed." He touched my shoulder, his expression warm. "For what it's worth, I've always thought you were extraordinary. Not because of what you've accumulated, but because of how you see the world, how you notice the overlooked, the way you honor history's quieter stories. The money is just a byproduct." His words caught me off guard, so different from the voices I'd grown up around. I felt a sting behind my eyes, tears I hadn't expected. But I blinked them away, focusing instead on the quiet snowfall outside, on how Boston shimmered in that moment, as if renewed. After everyone left, I sat alone beside my modest Christmas tree and placed a small wrapped package underneath. Inside were vintage first editions of my niece and nephew's favorite childhood books, each one inscribed with a quiet message. The value of things isn't always visible at first glance. Love, Aunt Harper. I would mail the package after the holidays, a door left slightly open. As I got ready for bed, I realized something striking. I hadn't checked my phone all evening. No anxious scans for messages, no dread, no emotional tightrope. The absence of that constant hum of anxiety was perhaps the most valuable gift I had received this Christmas. It was the beginning of something I hadn't even dared hope for: freedom. Freedom from expectations I could never meet. Freedom from chasing approval that was never mine to win. Freedom to simply be enough as I was. 6 months passed after that Thanksgiving. My relationship with my family remained unresolved. There were no dramatic reconciliations, no sudden healing, but something fundamental had shifted. Inside me. I no longer measured my worth through their eyes. I no longer allowed their limited imagination to define my limitless future. Spring arrived in Boston with a particular kind of light, clear, crisp, and strengthening. It illuminated every brick of the old North End buildings with new clarity. And in that same light, I saw myself with new eyes too. Not broken, not bitter, but whole. The antique shop had undergone subtle transformations. For years, I had operated as a solo enterprise, partly from preference for solitude, partly from the practical advantage of keeping my methods private. But in February, I hired my first employee. Blake, a recent art history graduate with specialized knowledge in textile preservation, brought with her a bright, unfiltered enthusiasm that reminded me of my younger self. "I can't believe I get to handle these pieces every day," she said one afternoon, delicately cataloging a collection of 18th century embroidered samplers. "My family thinks I'm crazy for taking this job instead of something corporate." "Mine too," I replied. The simple acknowledgement created an unexpected bond between us. Two women who had chosen passion over predictability and who understood the cost of that choice. With Blake taking on more of the day-to-day operations, I found time to pursue a project I'd been contemplating for years. What started as internal documentation evolved into something larger, creating detailed educational materials on antique authentication and valuation. Before long, I was hosting workshops for serious collectors and developing an online course that drew unexpected attention from across the country. My relationship with my family, however, remained complicated. The coffee meeting with my parents in January had been awkward, but not hostile. It was like watching three people carefully tiptoe through a minefield of old wounds and conflicting worldviews. My father, ever the practical one, seemed primarily focused on clarifying that I wouldn't be cutting them off completely. "We're still family," he said as we prepared to leave the cafe. "Disagreements happen in every family." "This was more than a disagreement, Dad," I replied quietly. "It was a revelation about how you see me." He had no response to that, but when he hugged me goodbye, it felt less perfunctory than usual. My mother maintained contact through weekly text messages, updates about the neighbors, questions about my health. Always steering clear of Madison or anything related to money. I replied with equal caution, sending her pictures of new acquisitions and the occasional comment about Boston's fickle weather. It wasn't deep connection, but it was something. A tentative bridge being reconstructed from both ends. Madison remained another matter entirely. After a few more attempts in January to reopen the investment opportunity discussion, she shifted to complete silence. Through my mother, I learned that she and Logan had purchased the house they wanted, without my assistance. They had apparently stretched themselves financially to do it. The children still received birthday and holiday gifts from me. Their acknowledgments came in the form of brief thank you notes, clearly written under parental supervision. Then, in April, I received a surprising call from my father. He asked if he could visit the shop, alone, without my mother, without Madison. He arrived on a Tuesday morning, looking somewhat out of place in his golf shirt and khakis, surrounded by centuries-old history and polished mahogany. "I've never really looked at this place," he admitted, standing before a Queen Anne's secretary desk I'd recently acquired. "It's more impressive than I imagined." I gave him a slow tour, explaining the stories behind select pieces. The Georgian silver service that had belonged to a Boston merchant family. The Civil War-era letters written by a nurse stationed at Gettysburg. The early American portrait by a female artist who had signed only with her initials to disguise her gender. "You really do know your stuff," he said finally. The surprise in his voice was both gratifying and quietly painful. "I always thought you were just playing at this." "I know." He ran his hand along the carved rail of a Chippendale chair, his expression uncharacteristically thoughtful. "I wanted security for you. Your mother and I both did. We pushed Madison toward law because it seemed safe. We worried when you chose this path. And now that you know it worked out financially, it's suddenly valid." I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "That's not fair," he started, then stopped himself. "Actually, maybe it is fair. I should have trusted your judgment more. Seen what you were building here?" It wasn't quite an apology, but from my father, it was a rare and significant concession. Perhaps the closest I would ever come to hearing that their early assessment of me, of my dreams, had been wrong. He stood quietly for a moment, then said something unexpected. "Madison is struggling. The new house, private school tuition increases, some investment that didn't pan out. She'd never admit it, but they're overextended." I recognized the implicit question. "I'm not bailing them out, Dad." He nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "Wouldn't expect you to. Just thought you should know." After he left, I sat at my desk considering our conversation. My father's limited recognition of my accomplishments felt like a small victory, but his update about Madison suggested the family dynamics remained unchanged. Success measured in possessions, worth determined by appearance, and financial decisions driven by status rather than substance. In May, I launched a new initiative that gave me unexpected satisfaction: a scholarship for young entrepreneurs interested in historical preservation and antique businesses. The program would provide both funding and mentorship to individuals demonstrating passion and knowledge in these fields. I structured it through a foundation to maintain my privacy, but the work of reviewing applications and meeting candidates connected me with a community of like-minded individuals who valued what I valued. The first recipient was a 23-year-old woman from Western Massachusetts who had been running a small restoration business from her grandfather's barn. Her knowledge of early American furniture and dedication to preserving traditional craftsmanship techniques impressed the entire selection committee. "I can't believe someone is actually supporting this work," she told me when I called with the news. "Everyone keeps telling me to get a real job instead." I smiled at the familiar refrain. "Trust me, this is as real as jobs get." Summer brought an unexpected development. My cousin Sullivan, who had reached out after Thanksgiving, announced she was relocating to Boston for a new position teaching environmental science at MIT. Over dinner at a North End restaurant, we discovered a surprising affinity. Both of us had chosen paths our extended family didn't quite understand. Both valued knowledge over appearance. And both had learned to create boundaries with relatives who recognized only conventional metrics of success. "Madison was always the same at family reunions," Sullivan recalled. "Everything a competition. Everything about status. I stopped attending because I got tired of hearing about her house, her car, her children's exclusive summer camps." "Some things never change," I agreed. "But some things do," Sullivan countered. "Look at you now. Not just financially successful, but doing meaningful work on your terms. That's the real victory." "Madison was always the same at family reunions," Sullivan recalled. "Everything a competition, everything about status. I stopped attending because I got tired of hearing about her house, her car, her children's exclusive summer camps." "Some things never change," I agreed. "But some things do," Sullivan countered. "Look at you now. Not just financially successful, but doing meaningful work on your terms. That's the real victory." As summer transitioned to fall, I found myself approaching the anniversary of the Thanksgiving revelation with unexpected equanimity. The acute pain had subsided, replaced by occasional melancholy for what might have been, but mostly acceptance of what was. I had learned to value the authentic connections in my life more deeply, with colleagues who respected my knowledge, clients who appreciated my expertise, and the small but genuine circle of friends who had known me before and after my financial status was revealed, treating me identically regardless. In September, I received a text message from my mother. Madison and Logan are separating. Please don't mention I told you. I felt a complex mixture of sympathy and vindication. Compassion for the pain their family was experiencing, combined with the uncomfortable recognition that the lifestyle they had prioritized had perhaps contributed to their instability. I sent a brief, neutral message to Madison expressing concern for her and the children. Her response, the first direct communication in months, was surprisingly vulnerable. Everything's a mess. Kids are struggling. Not how I planned my life to go. 2 days later, I sent a package to her home. Not money, which would have reinforced the dynamic I had fought to change, but 2 carefully chosen books on resilience for the children and a simple note. Sometimes the most valuable things emerge from unexpected change. I'm here if you need me. She didn't acknowledge the gift, but my mother reported that the books remained on their bedside tables. As November approached, bringing the inevitable question of Thanksgiving plans, I made a decision that felt both challenging and right. I invited my parents to Boston for the holiday. Neutral territory, just the 3 of us. To my surprise, they accepted. On the morning of Thanksgiving, exactly 1 year after the confrontation that had changed everything, I stood in my kitchen preparing a modest but special meal. The doorbell rang promptly at noon. My parents, punctual as always, bearing a bouquet of fall flowers and a palpable nervousness that matched my own. "Your apartment is lovely," my mother said, looking around with genuine interest rather than the evaluation I was accustomed to. "Those windows are spectacular." "Original to the building," I replied. "1850s glass." My father nodded appreciatively. "Good investment. Property like this in the North End." Some things changed slowly, if at all. The meal wasn't perfect. Conversations occasionally stalled or veered too close to sensitive topics. My mother still mentioned Madison's accomplishments too frequently, though she caught herself more than once. My father still struggled to show interest in my work beyond its financial success. But we were trying, all of us, to see each other more clearly, to listen more genuinely. After they left, promising to visit the shop the next day, I stood at my window, watching evening descend on the historic street below. The past year had taught me that wealth took many forms. Financial security, yes, but also self-knowledge, authentic passion, and the courage to be valued on your own terms. I had lost the illusion of unconditional family support, but gained a clearer understanding of my own worth. The antique dealer in me recognized the irony. Sometimes the most valuable things are those initially dismissed, their true worth apparent only to those with the knowledge to see beyond surface appearances. Like the Revolutionary War document found in a box of old papers, or the masterpiece painting leaning against a water heater. My passion and expertise had been overlooked until they produced tangible results the world recognized as valuable. But I had always known their worth. And in that knowledge lay the true fortune I had built. One that could never be demanded, divided, or diminished. If my story resonates with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had family members undervalue your choices until they proved successful? How did you handle it? What boundaries have you created to protect your peace? Hit like and subscribe if you appreciate authentic stories about family dynamics and self-worth. Share with someone who might need to hear that their path matters, even when others don't see its value. Thank you for listening to my journey. May you find the courage to value yourself, regardless of others' opinions.